All right, this is going to be a part two discussion, or sorry, a two-part discussion. This is going to be part one of chapter two. It's a meaty one. I don't want to read everything, but it makes enough points with half the chapter that I thought it leaves a good place to stop. Just over halfway through the chapter, and then I'll pick up on the second half, which should be a shorter video, I think. And this is of, none dare call it conspiracy. If you are not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's fine. This isn't a church book, but one of our leaders, President Ezra Taft Benson, in the 70s, this book was written in 1971. It was largely against conspiracies, against communism, and kind of defining that. And a lot of chapter 2 has to do with trying to define the enemy, because if we are not able to, it'll make even the point within chapter 2 that 99% of Americans in 1971 would say they are anti-communist. I'm not sure what that would be now. But in 1971, they would say that, but then even then, they can't really define what it is exactly that they are against. They just know it is not the same as capitalism. So, they believe in capitalism, so socialism and communism would be the antithesis, and that's kind of where it would end. And this puts on a different sort of thing so that we can all be on the same page. And is very compelling. And President Benson wanted everybody to read this, whether they were in the church or out of the church. So this will not, you don't have to think that I'm going to, like, if you aren't a member of the church, I'm not going to start preaching LDS Mormon stuff to you in this video, even though I do, I cover those topics in other ones. But I think this should be relevant to everyone. And it is very interesting. Now, I wanted to do this audio because I just can focus maybe a little better if I'm not looking into a camera and worrying about all that. Apologies for my reading. Sometimes I stumble when I read. I'll try to be eloquent where I can in explaining things, even though no promises there. Go maybe get an introduction in chapter 1 if you need to, and otherwise let's keep going. So chapter 2 is titled Socialism, Royal Road to Power for the Super Rich. And it starts with the idea that, Adolf Hitler existed. We know that he didn't come from he didn't come from money, he didn't come from power. And yet he made these plans on how he would conquer the world and how he would, rise to power and what he would do with that power. He had a distant plan in mind. Vladimir Lenin was similar in that he didn't come from, in the book it calls from a family of social lions. But what would happen if somebody that did come from money, did come from a high level of affluence and like a leg up, I guess you would say, what would they do? Like, would it be weird for us to think that there are more people that exist that were in the ilk of an Alexander the Great or a Julius Caesar or a Napoleon or whatever else? Of course there would be more people like that, but in chapter 1 especially, it talks about how people who may be behind the scenes, whereas we had people on chairs and, we had people kind of in the forefront leading the revolutions, sometimes there are things that we do not see, and the great conspiracy or the great thing that is a lie, according to the people in this book, according to President Benson, is that one should not connect communism with conspiracy. At least those in liberalism, and I'm not meaning leftism, But those in some circles would they would kind of brusque at that, the idea that communism and conspiracy would go together, especially as, we don't even, it's mentioned also in chapter 2 that communism itself isn't really preached by people who would espouse that kind of doctrine, because it doesn't, it's a tough pill to swallow. But socialism, which sounds more of a grassroots thing, kind of appears to be more of like a gateway sort of way to getting to full on communism. And again, one of the things that is very important in this chapter is making sure that we can define what exactly it is that we are trying to, what certainly President Benson found as a threat, this author here finds as a threat, and so that we can know when things are rising up that might be not especially good for us, and so that maybe also, just so we can be a little bit more direct on things that matter and things that might not be as much of a threat. So talks about how, we think of Karl Marx, we think of Russia, we think of these communistic countries, but we don't necessarily think about the billionaire sitting in Manhattan or London or Paris who may be having some of the same dreams of Lenin and Hitler. And look at the different countries that have gone through these revolutions and been replaced with dictators over not just centuries, but thousands of years. We've had these different ways that it has happened. And it sure seems like sometimes it looks like this grassroots sort of thing going on, but then it turns into something else completely. And also something that just is interesting about, as someone who enjoys reading history, is that we have these different dictators and things, people that rise up and these revolutions. And, sometimes we think, oh, this one was communistic and this one was fascist and this one was whatever else. But in each of these places, there are some specific things that seem to be common factors. And also, when we think of what happened in Nazi Germany and how they were just coming out of World War I, and look at the things that were slapped on their tables after World War I, and they were in a state of, they were in a rough spot. And so to be able to, it made sense that someone would kind of have his finger on the pulse of that culture at that time and be able to really move people. And, same with Alexander the Great, able to move people in a different sort of way. We have leaders in China and Russia. We have these different things, even in America, that, we look at what happened in Germany, and there were some very specific things that they were dealing with. And so even though, a lot of these different movements that happen, it's like this crazy thing. It's very odd to see in retrospect, and we think, oh, well, that would never happen to us because this or this. But it would be something that would touch on our own cultural kind of pulse if something like that were to happen, and is happening. And, what is happening in Venezuela, and what has happened in places like Cuba and different countries, even though they have some very different characteristics of the kinds of things that are driving it, it kind of goes towards a similar point. You know what I mean? And it's interesting to see that where we might have leaders, vocal leaders as kind of a focal point in some ways. There are other times where kind of people behind the scenes may be just as much of a threat, if not more, especially regarding the, chapter 1. So it's difficult for us, and this is in the book here now, quote, it's difficult for us, for the average individual to fathom such perverted lust for power. Since most of us have no lust for power, it's difficult for us to imagine that there are others who have, others who march for a different, or to a far different drum. For we must realize that there have been Hitlers and Lenins and Stalins and Caesars and Alexander the Greats throughout history. Why would we assume that there are no such men men today with perverted lusts for power? And obviously there are. We are going to, and this is in the book again, I'm reading this, we are going to present evidence that what you call communism is not run from Moscow or Peking, but is an arm of a bigger conspiracy run from New York, London, and Paris. The men at the apex of this movement are not communists in the traditional sense of the term. They feel no loyalty to Moscow, to Russia, or to China. They are loyal only to themselves and their undertaking, and therein lies kind of the fundamental thing that is really at the heart of it. These men certainly do not believe in the claptrap pseudoscience or pseudo-philosophy of communism. They have no intention of dividing their wealth. Socialism is a philosophy which conspirators exploit, but in which only the naive believe. And it goes on in this next part here about the concept being a much larger thing that is often kind of investigated. And in 1953, one of the men that did some kind of investigation on, let's see, I want to get this right. Interview for retired. A network, this global conspiracy network. High military intelligence circles are well aware of this network. In addition, the author has interviewed 6 men who have spent considerable time as investigators for congressional committees. In 1953, one of these men, Norman Dodd, headed the Reese Committee's investigation of tax-free foundations. When Mr. Dodd began delving into the role of international high finance in the World Revolutionary Movement, the investigation was killed on orders from the Eisenhower-occupied White House. According to Mr. Dodd, it is permissible to investigate the radical bomb throwers in the streets, but when you begin to trace their activities back to the origins in the legitimate world, the political Iron Curtain slams down. So they don't want you to see behind the curtain. You can believe anything you want about communism, except that it is a conspiracy run by men from the respectable world. Interesting that this sounds like this could be written just today. And so it talks about how you could do an interview, and this is in 1971. I'm not sure how the same questions would kind of go today, but if you were to ask an American in 1971 if they support or are against communism, 90% would say that they are anti-communist, or even 99%. I'm not so sure how that would go today. They would say, of course I'm anti-communist, especially in light of what was going on in the early 70s. But if you were to ask them if they could define it, that would be a whole new situation indeed. Some would say, oh yes, communism is a tyrannical brand of socialism. Or they may say it is, they might kind of reference Karl Marx and that what he had written was a good idea, but it just wasn't done right. The Russians had loused it up. Maybe you could have some other, references, how it's kind of taking from the rich and giving to the poor. And, people can't even really define it. What would be communism to Mao Zedong? What would it be to Fidel Castro? What was it for the Russians during what was it that Lenin espoused, right? It's very different. And so if we can't get on board the same way, it is like we are playing against a team who understands the rules that they are fighting against, but on the other side, the people that are saying that they are against the said thing can't even define it. And that makes total sense, especially early in this book. It might be a good idea that we define some of these things before continuing on. And that's also why I want to have a part A and a part B of this early chapter, this early chapter in this 8-chapter book. Moving on, let's see. So yeah, like frightening thing that we can't even define it, right? The American people do not know their enemy. So here's the definition that this author brings. And again, in light of, for the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, President Benson also had the same idea. And this sort of thing, if you are interested in like Ezra's Eagle, kind of follows the same thing. I think we're going to end this first part talking about kind of the spectrum that we are taught, how communism is on like the far left and fascism on the far right, but they give a different sort of approach. This is the definition they give, quote, an international conspiratorial drive for power on the part of men in high places willing to use any means to bring about their desired aim, global conquest. So rather than being, communism is on the far left, and, if you go far enough left, you're going to fall into communism, but if you go far enough right, it's fascism. We're going to talk about this a little bit, because what they are most worried about is that this communism has more to do with large government overreach and conspiratorial, that conspiratorial is the key word, drive for power on the part of men in high places. And that can go, if that is the definition they are using to know their enemy, that is on, the spectrum of fascism and socialism as total opposites doesn't even make sense. Rather, that it's more of the horseshoe sort of shape, where far fascism and far communism are the same enemy. They just have a different, they're just touching on a different cultural sort of thing going on. Are you an international globalist socialist, or are you a national socialist? But it still whips up people in much the same way and gives government to the same place. It still results in more government. So in the definition, it does not mention Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, the bourgeoisie, or the proletariat. It doesn't talk about materialism. It's not about that. So in this chapter so far, I'm so glad they did this. They said nothing about the pseudo-economic or political philosophy of communists. It's not about that. They did call out the international conspiratorial drive for power. And I think that is a great distinction. Unless we understand the conspiratorial nature of communism, we do not understand it at all. We will be eternally fixated at the Gus Hall level of communism. And that's not where it is at, baby. That's where they add the baby, and that's not where, yeah. So in a way, it sounds like that can't remember who the quote of, it's got the jar with the black ants and the red ants, and they're peaceful and nothing's happening, but as soon as you shake the jar, that's when they start eating each other. So it's, if we're fighting the wrong place, it's going to be very hard to win something. The way to bring down the wrath of the liberal press establishment, this is in the book, or the professional liberals, is simply to use the word conspiracy in relation to communism. They would have you think, and this is me talking now, they would have you think that there is nobody shaking the jar. But it is black ants against red ants, and that one is the true side, and that there is nobody shaking this jar. But I think Ezra Taft Benson would certainly say that it is the people shaking the jar that are really at the heart of this problem. We are not supposed to believe that communism is a political conspiracy. We can believe anything else we wish about it. We can believe it is brutal, tyrannical, evil, or even that it intends to bury us. And we will win the plaudits of the vast majority of American people. But don't ever, ever use the word conspiracy if you expect applause. For that is what the wrath of liberaldom will be unleashed. For that is when the wrath of liberaldom will be unleashed against you, when you use conspiracy. We are not disallowed from believing in all types of conspiracy, just modern political conspiracy. We even see that in Life magazine, and again, this is in the book. This is my own comment. Even Life magazine believes in some sort of conspiracy. The question is, which is the more lethal form of conspiracy, political or criminal or political? And what is the difference between a member of Cosa Nostra and a communist, or more properly, an insider conspirator? Men like Lucky Luciano, who have scratched and clawed to the top of the heap in organized crime, must of necessity be diabolically brilliant, cunning, and absolutely ruthless. But almost without exception, the men in the hierarchy of organized crime have had no formal education. Like, what then would somebody who did have formal education, who had the same sorts of motivations and drive for power, would they be selling marijuana to high school students? Would they be getting involved with prostitution and that, in gangs? Likely they would be getting involved in government power. It's the pathway as old as time, getting to the center of the ruling class, right? And so it's just interesting to see how it happens in different ways, and people just keep falling for it in different ways. But the conspiracy is to seize the power of government. The conspiracy to seize the power of government is as old as government itself. And this is a quote here. Each conspirator has two things in common with every other conspirator. He must be an accomplished liar and a far-seeing planner. And we can repeat FDR's statement that in politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way. And not every politician is corrupt, and not every politician is evil, for sure. But people who are trying to gain not just economic wealth, but power, are going to be somewhere involved in the political game, whether on a seat or behind the scenes as donors or whatever it is. So, in reality, communism is a tyranny planned by power seekers whose most effective weapon is the big lie. There are two parts of this lie. One is that communism is inevitable. And so if you're talking to someone who disagrees with communism and you ask, well, isn't America becoming more, isn't socialism leading more towards communism? And one might say, well, yeah, but it's inevitable. And that, what's one person going to do against it, right? And that the second part of that lie is that communism is a movement of the downtrodden masses rising up against exploiting bosses. And that's why we have a bunch of useful idiots, often young, often college age, that are, just useful idiots. And it's happening again. That's a freaky thing That you can see that in the Chinese Revolution. You see that in, with the brown shirts. We see that all over the place. We see our local college campuses and how those are becoming more and more socialistic. And you see what is happening with our young people. It's crazy. So, a part of it is that, it's inevitable. We can't fight it. We can't go fight City Hall. We can't fight the Parliament. It's just going to happen. It's going to be futile. And I'm going to read this. So in about 500 BC, the Chinese warlord philosopher Sun Tzu stated, quote, "Supreme excellence in warfare lies in the destruction of your enemy's will to resist, in the enemy's will to resist in advance of perceptible hostilities. We call it Psy-war or political warfare today. In poker, it is called running a good bluff. The principle is the same." So how did Karl Marx view communism? In a part of his Communist Manifesto, which there's an interesting asterisk that I think about Karl Marx that not everyone knows about. But in the Communist Manifesto, which a lot of people will look at that for their doctrines of communism, which might not exactly be right, but certainly, I can't believe people will look at that and call it a good thing. But there are a few things that need to be abolished or accomplished in the communist, the doctrines of the Communist Manifesto. 1, the elimination of all right to private property. 2, the dissolution of the family unit. 3, destruction of what Marx referred to as the opiate of the people, religion. No more private property, dissolution of the family unit, doesn't mean anything, and destruction of religion. Now, we've seen how people have used religion to gain power and gain undue power. But also in this other sense, it's the other way. So, there's many pathways to that point, it would seem. And while we can look at, a lot of people will just look at the dissolution of religion as communism, as one of the main factors, and it certainly can be, but we also need to worry about some that would maybe use religion in undue ways that would cause an increase in government reach, especially at the executive levels, right? So that was how Karl Marx would view it. And so in his view, after some length of time, the powerful state would begin to wither away and crumble, and people would live in peace and light, and everything would be great, which is, of course, absurd. Here is the asterisk that they give to Karl Marx. You'll find this interesting. Karl Marx was hired by a mysterious group who called themselves the League of Just Men to write the Communist Manifesto. So, wasn't even his doctrine. As demagogic boob bait, which is something I had never heard. BOOB-BAIT must be a 70s thing. A boob bait to appeal to the mob. In actual fact, the Communist Manifesto was in circulation for many years before Marx's name was widely enough recognized to establish his authorship for the Revolutionary Handbook. All Karl Marx really did was to update and codify the very same revolutionary plans and principles set down 70 years earlier by Adam Weishaupt, Weishaupt, the founder of the Order of Illuminati in Bavaria. So we have the Order of Illuminati in Bavaria, and then under them, the League of Just Men, under them, this Karl Marx, just to be a figurehead, right? In moving the masses towards a specific aim or goal or means. Not means. I'm an idiot sometimes, but you know what I mean. Quote, and it is widely acknowledged by serious scholars of this subject that the League of Just Men was simply an extension of the Illuminati, which was forced to go deep underground after it was exposed by a raid in 1786 conducted by the Bavarian authorities. Socialism was the bait, or socialism would be the bait, the excuse to establish the dictatorship. Since dictatorship is hard to sell in idealistic terms, the idea had to be added that the dictatorship was just a temporary necessity and would dissolve of its own accord. You really have to be naive to swallow it, but millions do. So, again, in this, the drive to establish socialism, not communism, is at the core of everything that the communists and the insiders do. When you listen to somebody, somebody speaking about communism, they rarely mention communism. They speak only of the struggle to complete the full socialization of America. Oop, there we go. Thought I was paused for a sec. So there's an interesting thing here. I don't want to read all of it, but there was a 1970 issue of New York Magazine that contains an article by Professor John Kenneth Galbraith, who himself a professed socialist, entitled "Richard Nixon and the Great Socialist Revival," which, he was right-wing, but again, if we're looking at things like Ezra's Eagle, it doesn't really matter from Hoover to Obama. Like, they're all kind of keeping the eagle going forward in the way that the powers that be or whatever kind of want it to go. That even though there's this rocking of the boat from left to right, it's like there's this wind, I guess you could say. Even though we're rocking left to right, there's this wind that is pushing everything socially further to the left. And even under Nixon, so even like in this article, it's saying that even though you can have a Democrat or a Republican, there's this wind that kind of pushes you to the left. And, maybe you would think that under Nixon it would go slower, but that, it was inevitable or whatever. It's going to push things over to the left. It said, let's see, Mr. Trohan had also led to believe that the trend is inevitable. Quote, conservatives should be realistic enough to recognize that the country is going deeper into socialism and will see expansion of federal power. And that's that again, there's that definition. So it's going deeper into socialism and will see the expansion of federal power. And like, what a better way to do it than through socialism? Whether Republican or Democrats are in keep messing up where I'm at here. Whether Republicans or Democrats are in power, the only comfort they may have is that the pace will be slower with Richard Nixon than it might have been with Hubert H. Humphrey. But that it is essentially happening. So I'm going to put up this chart here. Hold on. All right, so here, I'm not quite right on the chart. Here are some charts in the book here. So the first one at the top is the way that it is presented, that we have communism on the left and fascism on the right, and you want to be somewhere in the middle because, either one is bad, and they both are like the red ants and the black ants, saying that the other one is worse, and that we're all thinking that we're somewhere in the middle where there's there's communism, fascism, but then there's this Fabian socialism in the middle. So I want to read this. The establishment promotes the idea of the inevitability of communism through its perversion of terms used in describing the political spectrum. We are told that on the far left of the political spectrum, we find communism, which is admittedly dictatorial. But we are also told that equally to be feared is the opposite of the far left, i.e. the far right, which is labeled fascism. We are constantly told that we should all try to stay in the middle of the road, which is termed democracy, but by which the establishment means Fabian or creeping socialism. The fact that the middle of the road has been moving exorbitantly leftward for 40 years is ignored. And, 40 years from 1971, that's the 30s. And so, right where we talk about, that goes back to President Hoover. And if you are an Ezra's Eagle guy, the first one on the wing where this starts to kind of get pushed further leftward, it seems, is Hoover. And he was, I think, in 1929. No, that doesn't make sense. I think, I thought it was he gets sworn in 1929 to 33, right? I can't, maybe. That's probably right. But anyway, so from that point forward, that is just pushing further towards socialism, which is like this gateway drug in the minds of Ezra Taft Benson and this author towards communism. There's an excellent example of the use of false alternatives, or this is, we are given the choice between communism, which is international socialism on one end, and the spectrum of Nazism, National Socialism on the other end, or Fabian socialism in the middle. The whole spectrum is socialist, wherever you choose to fall, or wherever you fall, which is totally absurd. Where would you put an anarchist on this spectrum? Where would you put a person who believes in a constitutional republic and the free enterprise system? He is not represented here. Yet this spectrum is used for political definitions by a probable 90% of the people of the nation. Below in chart 2 is a more accurate political spectrum. Communism is by definition total government. If you have total government, it makes little difference whether you call it communism, fascism, socialism, Caesarism, or Pharaohism. It's all pretty much the same from the standpoint of the people who must live and suffer under it. If total government, by any of its pseudonyms, stands on the far left, then by logic, the far right should represent anarchy or no government. Chart 1 depicts a false left-right political spectrum used by liberals, which has communism, international socialism, on the far left, and its twin fascism, National Socialism, on the far right, with the middle of the road being Fabian socialism. The entire spectrum is socialist again. Did it just do that twice? Anyway, it says it twice. Okay. I want to finish on this note. Our founding fathers, again, I'm Canadian, so take what I'm going to say take this with a grain of salt, but this is their words, and we all follow this, and a lot of us have roots in America, and we want America to succeed, and it is also relevant for other countries. Like, look what's happening also in Canada. Like, we have slipped way left, meaning way left in terms of socialism, socialistic things that we have, and an increased government overreach. It's absolutely true. Our founding fathers revolted against the near total government of the English monarchy, but they knew that having no government at all would lead to chaos. So they set up a constitutional republic with a very limited government. And you can see that here. So it's not necessarily here or here. Like, total government doesn't work. And this is where these all land on the same spectrum, but they all kind of have a little bit of a different bent. And one is globalistic, one is highly nationalistic, but also with too much government overreach being at the top, being the case for both of them. But on the other end is anarchy, which doesn't work. So there is a very limited constitutional republic. They set up the constitutional republic with a very limited government. They knew that men prospered in freedom. Although the free enterprise system is not mentioned specifically in the Constitution, it is the only one that can exist under a constitutional republic. All collectivist systems require power in government, which the Constitution did not grant. Our founding fathers had no intention of allowing the government to become an instrument to steal the fruit of one man's labor and give it to another who had not earned it. Our government was to be one of severely limited powers. Thomas Jefferson said, in questions of power then, quote, in questions of power, then let no man be heard of confidence in man. Man, I'm an idiot when I'm let me try this again. Quote, this is Thomas Jefferson. In questions of power then, let no man be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Jefferson knew that if the government were not enslaved, people would be. If it was Jefferson's view that government governs best, which governs least. You know, it's like it all kind of, it's so important that we understand how to define this so that we know about things moving forward. And so share this with people who might be interested. Yes, I am LDS. Yes, our president said to be warned about this. Yes, I will have my own bias and things, but I want this to also be something that anyone can also appreciate. So feel free to share it if you would like. Please be respectful in the comments and give your own insights about things. I think this is important, especially we all see this crazy stuff that is happening. And I think it is less about this clash between communism as this international socialism against like fascism as national socialism. And like the media will kind of paint weird pictures about, they'll paint weird pictures about what is actually happening right now, when really I think some of the issues that really is the tale as old as time is this tyranny that can happen when there is too much government overreach, whether it is a king, whether it is a committee, whether it is an executive branch that rises up to say to heck with what is happening at a local and state level. We are taking over. I might have totally painted that picture wrong, but you know what I mean? I think it's important. So this is part 1 of chapter 2. If you like this, then leave a like, and I will continue with part B or part 2 of chapter 2, and we will keep going in with this 8-part thing, or not 8-part. I'm an idiot. So 8-chapter thing. So talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.